The biggest UFC fraud checks in recent memory. There's been a lot of undefeated fighters in the UFC this year that, for one reason or another, have just failed to live up to our expectations. So, in honor of all these undefeated fighters losing, I want to talk about the biggest fraud checks in recent memory. Not in UFC history, just in recent memory. The ones that we can definitely remember if we just were to think of like the top 10 fraud checks that we recently saw. So, that's what this video is going to be about. If you guys enjoy these kind of videos, then let me know in the comments. And what exactly is a fraud check? Well, let's talk about the definition. In the context of the UFC, the term fraud check primarily refers to when a fighter who has been hyped up as a rising star or potential champion fails to live up to those expectations, often by suffering an unexpected or definitive loss. This term gained prominence as a way to describe instances where a fighter's perceived skill level doesn't match their performance in the cage, particularly when facing an opponent who is considered significantly worse. So that's basically what a fraud check is. Basically, Fighter A is expected to go in there and destroy Fighter B. Fighter B bust up and easily beat Fighter A. Therefore, they got fraud checked. Not always easily, but they lose when they're supposed to be heavily favored to win. So I have 10 guys in this video who have been recently fraud checked for one reason or another. And some of the people in this video are fighters in the video. You guys are going to be surprised. But let's get on to the first one, starting off with Mike Malot, Canada's only hope, was fraud checked in 2024 by none other than the GOAT himself, Neil Magny. Now, this is a horrible look for Mike Malot. Now, I still think that Mike Malot is a better fighter than Neil Magny. He just gassed himself out going for a finish against Neil Magny, and ultimately in the third round, a gassed out Mike Malot got ground and pound TKO'd by Neil Magny, which was a horrible look because this guy's not young. He's going to be 34 at the end of this year, and he might be Canada's only hope for a champion, him and Jasmine Dazudavicius. But leading into the fight, I mean, this guy was 2-0, knockout power in his hands, and he was a negative 380 favorite. So Mike Malot was expected to go in there and completely ragdoll Neil Magny. Not even ragdoll him, just knock him out. I mean, Neil Magny's been knocked out a bunch at this point, and Mike Malot, this was supposed to be an easy win for him, a near 4-1 favorite. And what happens? Neil Magny comes in there and hangs in there the first two rounds of Mike Malot, nearly gets finished a couple times, but hangs in there. And in the third round, Mike Malot, gassed out of his mind, gets mounted by Neil Magny and then ground and pound TKO'd. Not a good look, obviously. He has bounced back since then with 2 wins, most recently against Charles Radke. I forgot who the other one was, but yeah, man, it's unfortunate that Mike Malot, the Canadian prospect, Canada's only hope for a potential contender, you know, because Canada, just like kind of like the United States right now, they're struggling to find like really good fighters. There's no Canadian champions, there's no US champions, so North America is struggling, and Mike Malot was Canada's big hope, and yeah, Neil Magny fraud checked him, and it wasn't a good look. Like I said, he's bounced back since then, but given that this guy's almost 34 years old and how stacked welterweight is, I don't see him ever making a run to the top 10. Let's get on to Sherbet Bullet, who you guys might think I'm going to say got fraud checked by Michael Venom Page, but absolutely not, because Shar Magomedov got fraud checked by Marc-Andre Barriault. Now, you guys are going to say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because he won that fight. Yes, that's true. However, he got his nose shattered and face busted up by a guy that he was supposed to stylistically destroy. Marc-Andre Barriault is your run-of-the-mill, jack-of-all-trades fighter that's not talented anywhere, and if you're anywhat of a decent fighter, you're going to destroy Marc-Andre Barriault. I mean, Joe Pyfer sent him to the Shadow Realm, and this fight really showed me, like, the MVP fight showed me that Sherbet Bullet was obviously never going to be a champion. I kind of already knew that, but if this Marc-Andre Barriault fight showed me anything, is that Sherbet Bullet is just not that good. Like, even his striking, it's not that good. It's a bit overrated. Now, do I respect him for fighting with one eye and going to war with Marc-Andre Barriault, hanging in there, not getting finished, fighting with a broken nose? Absolutely. I'm not trying to take a dunk on him completely, even though he's kind of a douchebag. What I'm trying to say is, if this guy was ever going to be top 10 or championship material, you have to destroy Marc-Andre Barriault. Dude, I'm sorry, but Rainier de Ritter, Robert Whitaker, Dricus du Plessis, all these guys would obliterate Marc-Andre Barriault. Even the bottom feeders of the rankings in the middleweight division would destroy him. And the fact that Shara got his nose broken and had not a competitive fight, but had a moment where he might have gotten finished is very embarrassing. I mean, the loss to MVP could have been called as fraud check, but it wasn't that surprising. You know, MVP is one of the fastest strikers at welterweight. He goes up to middleweight, and he outstrikes Sherbet Bullet And Sherbet Bullet said he had a whole list of injuries going into that fight. But either way, MVP is one of the best strikers in the UFC right now. So getting outstruck over 3 rounds isn't the worst. I didn't think that was necessarily a fraud check for Sherbet Bullet, but the way, even in a win, I think the Marc-Andre Barriault fight was more of a fraud check. And I mean, we're talking about, like I said, this guy got his nose shattered in a fight he was supposed to dominate. Sherbet Bullet on paper was supposed to go in there and completely work and destroy Marc-Andre Barriault, make him look like a fool and make him look like he never belonged in there with him. But instead, he got his nose broken. And yes, even though this was a win, I think that this fight fraud checked Sherbet Bullet more than the Michael Venom Page one did. Let's get on to Patchy Mix. And you know what, guys? I'm ashamed to say that I picked Patchy Mix in his debut to beat Mario Bautista, and boy, could I have not been more wrong. Little did I know he would show up stiffer than a scarecrow against Mario Bautista, because obviously that's who he got fraud checked by. Patchy Mix, a record of 20-1, right? Hyped up Bellator champ with a 20-1 record with a great grappling prowess. In my mind, I'm like, all right, this guy's going to come into the UFC. He took the fight on short notice, but he's going to come into the UFC. He's going to initiate his grappling on Mario Bautista, and he's going to win the fight, right? That's pretty much was the consensus about Patchy Mix. And man, did we not know that we were in for disappointment, because he didn't grapple in the fight, and this guy had negative footwork. He must be related to Jamal Hill, because Patchy Mix's footwork in the fight versus what's his name, Mario Bautista, is some of the worst footwork I've ever seen across any UFC fight. And then we're talking about a fighter in the lower weight classes. At least Jamal Hill can say he's in the plotty man's, old man light heavyweight division, so he's allowed to have crappy footwork. Patchy Mix is in one of the best divisions in the UFC, 135, and this guy looked stiff as a board out there. Like Conor McGregor says, you're stiff as a board, I'd snap you in half. And I think, myself included, and a lot of like MMA YouTubers and people who predict fights, they obviously bought into the Bellator hype. They were like, look, this guy comes from Bellator. He was a champion. He has knockout wins, but he has a lot of submission wins. And Mario Bautista, even though he got a technical win over Jose Aldo, he's a bit overrated. But listen, man, Mario Bautista, people forget, man. Yeah, he pieced up Patchy Mix. And Patchy Mix proved once again why Bellator champs are always overly hyped coming into the UFC. We learned our lesson. We're not picking Aaron Pico to beat Lerone Murphy or Movsar Evloev. Aaron Pico is going to get decisioned by Lerone Murphy. I've never been more confident in a pick in my entire life. Bellator guys just aren't up to the UFC level, and I think we should have saw this one coming, but I watched some highlights. I bought into the hype, but you're only as good as the people you train around, right? And this guy, Patchy Mix, was training with Bellator fighters, so you only can get so good when you're not training with the best in the world, or fighting against those guys. So yeah, Patchy Mix was expected to go in there and beat Mario Bautista by a lot of people, and not only did he disappoint, but he looked terrible. One of the worst performances by any Bellator fighter coming into the UFC. So yes, he absolutely got fraud checked by Mario Bautista. Not to mention he was 20-1. Let's get on to Bo Nickel. Now, what makes the fight against the person he got fraud checked against like a fraud check, in my opinion, Rainer de Ridder. I'm not saying that Rainer de Ridder's not good, right? A lot of times guys would be like, man, you guys call anything a fraud check. What makes it a fraud check is how much of a big game Bo Nickel was talking, right? Bo Nickel was like, yeah, Hamzat's wrestling's trash. Like, these guys, DDP and Robert Whitaker, they're not looking too great. Like, once I get up there, I'm going to destroy these guys. And then the fact that he was, what was he in the fight? He was a negative 375 favorite going into the fight with RDR, a former one double champ. I saw this fraud check coming from a mile away, but some people still bought into the Bo Nickel hype. They thought he would get it done. They thought he would out grapple and work RDR on the ground, who's kind of looked as like a goofy striker. But little did they know that Bo Nickel trains with a bunch of yes men, has never taken a strike in his entire life by the look of his face whenever RDR was spamming knees into his body. And yeah, man, like I said, what makes this a fraud check is how much of a big game Bo Nickel talked. This guy was talking like he was the uncrowned champ whenever he's only been training MMA since 2022, and all he has is an overhand right. This guy's been training striking for 3 to 4 years now. 3 years, 4 years, whatever it's been, and all he's developed is an overhand right. Where's the uppercuts, right? Where's the elbows? Where's the knees, the kicks? I understand this stuff takes time, but if you're going to talk a big game, expect ridicule coming back your way. And this was one of the most high-profile fraud checkings in recent memory. Obviously, it's going to age well. Rainer de Ridder, I've always thought he was like top 6, top 4 in the UFC material. I knew he was great, even if he looked goofy on the feet. I mean, look at Dricus du Plessis, who's also known as goofy. He's a champion, so you can't underestimate these guys. But the fact that Bo Nickel talked such a big game and then got absolutely embarrassed and made to quit against Rainer de Ridder is what makes this a fraud check. Not so much like if you look at the fight on paper, skills versus skills, I think it's obvious if you have a brain that Rainer DeRitter was going to beat Bo Nickel. That should have been obvious, but the fans bought into the hype, and I was not surprised at all. But yeah, Bo Nickel talked a big game, so therefore that makes it a fraud check because he bought his own hype and he trained with a bunch of yes men, and that was exposed in his fight versus RDR. Let's get on to the zesty man himself who hangs out with Frank Ocean any chance he gets. Peyton Talbot was fraud checked by Raoni Barcelos. Granted, in a fight, this guy was a negative 1150 favorite leading into the fight. Can you imagine the amount of parlays that Peyton Talbot cooked in his fight against Raoni Barcelos? This guy was supposed to be the lock of the entire year. No way Peyton Talbot loses to Raoni Barcelos unless he slips on a banana peel. And Raoni Barcelos didn't even need to bring the banana peel. All he needed was a little bit of grappling, and Peyton Talbot folded and just got taken down and dominated and made to look like a fool out there. I was a guy back in the day that was talking about this guy has future championship like potential just because I saw how good of a striker he was, and I assumed, which I shouldn't have, this is the casual in me, I assumed that this guy's wrestling or his anti-grappling would have been good. He would be able to defend takedowns until he fought the first grappler he fought. He literally just got taken down like it was nothing. I mean, this was supposed to be a fight where Peyton Talbot went in there, got an easy KO against Raoni Barcelos, right? Made it look pretty convincing and easy, but no. What happened? Peyton Talbot got worked by an old man. A 37-year-old Raoni Barcelos made Peyton Talbot look like he's never grappled a day in his life. And maybe this guy doesn't, you know? Maybe Peyton Talbot just trains striking in the gym. And he was hoping that he would never have to face a guy who can take him down. But I will say since then he has bounced back. I forgot. He fought another undefeated guy. I forgot his name. But he did bounce back since then. And his grappling did look improved. So shout out to Peyton Talbot for actually training his grappling. But this is no doubt a fraud check. A fight where he was a negative 1150. One of the biggest favorites in UFC history. And to get dominated and lose all 3 rounds against an old man, Raoni Barcelos, it's not a great look. Do I think Peyton Talbot still has championship potential? No, I don't. I definitely overhyped him like a lot of other YouTubers and fans. But, you know, I think maybe one day he could become like a bottom feeder of the rankings. I don't think he's ever going to be anything special. That grappling holds he showed in this game, send him to Dagestan 2-3 years and forget. Otherwise, he's absolutely fried against the next wrestler he faces. Speaking of fried, Paddy Pimplet. Now, this is an interesting one, right? Because Paddy Pimplet's undefeated in the UFC. So how did he get fraud checked? Well, let's be real, guys. He got fraud checked against Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon, your run-of-the-mill journeyman, fought Paddy Pimplet, I think, in 2022, 2023. A couple years ago, he fought Paddy Pimplet. And it was expected that Paddy Pimplet was going to go out there and dominate and destroy Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon, like I said, he's just a journeyman. 1 win, 2 losses, 2 wins, 1 loss. Like just kind of like a win-1, lose-1 kind of fighter, 50-50 fighter. So Paddy Pimplet, the UFC Golden Goose, was supposed to go in there and destroy Jared Gordon. And let's be real, man. He clearly lost the fight and he was gifted the win. You can even see Dana White in the crowd whenever they're announcing the winner. Once they announced it was Paddy, he was like, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness it was Paddy. Can't have Jared Gordon beating our Golden Goose. What makes this even more of a fraud check is the fact that Paddy Pimplet in the post-fight interview also called for fight of the night when this was arguably the worst fight on the entire card. And he said that the fight wasn't close and he dominated the fight. That was one of the most delusional takes from any fighter I've ever seen, and it turned the entire fan base against Paddy. After this fight, Paddy was getting hate from every which way. Everybody was calling him a fraud, saying that he lost to Jared Gordon and he'll never be anything in the UFC. This is the fight that really put Paddy on the map as a fraud. And this is why, still to this day, he isn't respected really as a serious challenge, even though he's gotten some, I'm not even going to say solid wins. Let's be real. He hasn't beaten anyone good since, man. I'm just going to keep it a buck. Since beating Jared Gordon, he's went on to beat 39-year-old Tony Ferguson, who's on like a 6-fight losing streak. Couldn't even finish him. That's embarrassing, right? Then he went on to beat old man Bobby Green, who has no chin left. Bobby Green literally threw himself into a submission. Paddy Pimplet gets the submission. Not a good win. Bobby Green, horrible win. Tony Ferguson, horrible win. And then he beat old man Michael Chandler, who hasn't won a fight in 3 years and has no fight IQ, who's 39 years old. Paddy Pimplet's last 3 opponents have been 38, 38, and 39. And they are on a combined 13-fight losing streak. So Paddy Pimplet has done absolutely jack squat in terms of competition since losing to Jared Gordon. Because, yes, he 100% lost that fight and got gifted a win. And I'm still not impressed by Paddy Pimplet, man. I picked him to beat Michael Chandler. I thought it was an easy pick. I think this guy needs to fight somebody in their prime. I think Arman would stomp Paddy Pimplet. And yes, 100% he got fraud checked by Jared Gordon, and he's still, even though he's looked impressive against these old men, I'm still not impressed by Patty Pimplet. I need to see him fight somebody who's not a senior citizen. Because Jared Gordon was only 34 whenever he fought him, and he beat Patty. He should have got the win on the cards, right? And Patty Pimplet since then has only fought senior citizens who literally need wheelchairs to get to the octagon. So I'm not impressed. I need to see this guy beat somebody else. Until then, he's still a fraud in my books. Do I think he's like the worst fighter on the roster in the rankings? No. I think he'd beat a lot of ranked guys, but is he championship material? I don't think so. Let's get on to Benoit Saint Denis, who's arguably the biggest fraud in lightweight history. That's right. Before fighting Dustin Poirier, this guy was on a 5-fight win streak, all finishes, finishing Matt Frevola, right? Having some really solid performances, looking like he can contend in there with the best of them. However, he ran into Dustin Poirier and got KO'd. He dominated the first round, but he got KO'd in the second round. However, we all kind of wrote that loss off and said, you know what, Benoit Saint Denis, he had staph infection going into that fight. He gassed out really fast. He didn't look great. Maybe it was just the staph. Then came the Renato Moicano fight, which is where he got fraud checked. BSD got absolutely whooped. He made Renato Moicano look like Khamzat Chimaev. He got absolutely brutalized where both his eyes were nearly shut by the end of round 1. Fought into the end of round 2 and got called off due to a doctor stoppage. That was one of the biggest ass whoopings I've ever seen in the UFC. And since then, man, this guy is an absolute fraud, and I don't think he beats anybody inside the top 15 at lightweight. Not a single person. I would pick every single fighter at lightweight that's ranked to beat him. Like, he's slow on the feet, he's sloppy, has no head movement. I mean, his grappling is his best part of his game, but he's just so slow across the board. Even against Cal Prepolek, the Canadian can they threw in their last minute to fight him. It's just, he wasn't good, man. Let's be real. Like I said, he got brutally destroyed in the grappling by Moicano whenever that's his bread and butter. So it's not like he got pieced up on the feet by Moicano. No, he got destroyed on the ground, and then to the point where the doctor had to step in. And now he's seen as the worst ranked fighter at lightweight. And second of all, how's this guy even ranked? He has no ranked wins, and he's on a 2-fight losing streak. People talk about Dagestan privilege. What about French privilege, brother? But yes, Benoit Saint Denis is a fraud, and I will stick by that. And I think Mauricio Rufy is going to send his head into orbit. Let's get on to Rebellis de Spain, which honestly, looking at the last loss of his UFC career versus Austin Lane, this might be one of the worst aging losses, like biggest fraud checks ever. Because look what's happening to Austin Lane. Austin Lane's is Austin Lane's only win in the UFC versus Rebellis de Spain? That's a really embarrassing loss. I think he was fraud checked by Austin Lane. Yes, he was beat by Waldo Cortez Acosta, but Cortez Acosta is kind of a crafty vet. You know, he's moving himself up the rankings. He's proved that he's a decent heavyweight. Nothing special. You know, for heavyweight standards, Waldo Cortez Acosta, it's not the worst loss in the world. You know, Rebellis de Spain doesn't have the best takedown defense. He's a striker. Has the longest reach in UFC history at 87 inches. Of course, he was expected to go out there and KO Waldo Cortez Acosta. Drops the decision. Whatever. People call that a fraud check. No, I think the real fraud check is this guy getting out-grappled and outworked by Austin Lane. Arguably the worst UFC heavyweight on the entire roster and one of the worst heavyweights ever. I would favor both Tafa brothers to beat Austin Lane. That's how bad he is. He has no chin. He has no defense on the feet. He has no jiu-jitsu, nothing, dude. And this guy was able to out-grapple Rebellis de Spain. This has got to be one of the biggest fraud checks in UFC history. Of course, Rebellis de Spain has gone to karate combat since then. But leading into the Austin Lane fight, he was a negative 350 favorite. And can you imagine the favorite this guy would have been if he'd have beat Waldo Cortez Acosta by KO? He would have been like a negative 2,000 favorite against Austin Lane. He was only a negative 350 because he was coming off a loss to Cortez Acosta. And that's the only reason. Otherwise, Rebellis de Spain would have been an even bigger favorite. But no, he got absolutely outworked and out-wrestled, and no wonder the UFC cut him. You cannot be out-grappled by Austin Lane and stay in the UFC. Like I said, he got held down and out-grappled by arguably the worst heavyweight. Like, dude, I would favor every heavyweight on the roster right now to beat Austin Lane. Austin Lane is so bad. The fact that Rebellis de Spain lost to him, it truly is embarrassing, and I do think he's found his home in karate combat, so shout out to Rebellis de Spain. I'm happy for him, but man, this guy, talk about a hyped-up prospect with an 87-inch reach. The next Yoel Romero in terms of power. No, this guy, turns out he has the takedown defense of some of the work, CM Punk, we'd call it. So yeah, Rebellis de Spain absolutely got fraud checked by Austin Lane and technically by Waldo Cortez Acosta because he was favored to win both fights. Let's get on to Joe Pyfer, the saltiest man in all the land. This guy is in everybody's cabinet, table salt, if you will. Joe Pyfer was fraud checked by Jack Hermanson, which hasn't gone on to age well because Jack Hermanson was recently KO'd by RoboCop. However, Joe Pyfer has since bounced back with a couple of wins, which is good to see. I wasn't too impressed with his Kelvin Gastelum win, but let's just call it what it is, man. He won the first 2 rounds against Jack Hermanson, right? He was looking pretty good, but then he got schooled for the next 3 rounds. He made Jack Hermanson look like prime Floyd Mayweather in the last 3 rounds of their fight. Joe Pyfer, an issue with him is that he tries to force the finish. He loads up on every single shot he throws, and he ends up gassing himself out to the point where he just gets pieced up. He's such a meathead that he can't just, like, I don't know, he can't, like, fight a technical game and, like, be smart about it. Everything's about taking his opponent's head off. Like, even against Kelvin Gastelum, he was trying so hard to get the finish. So this guy obviously went in there against Jack Hermanson, and he forced the finish, or tried to force the finish, and it didn't work. And by the 3rd round, he was a bit gassed out, and Jack Hermanson just kept peppering him with jabs, peppering him with boxing, and just pieced this guy up. And, of course, Salty Man Pyfer was pissed off at the end of the fight, so much so that he went and get a hair transplant. He's like, you know what? I got boxed up by Jack Hermanson. I definitely got to do something to fix my game. Let me get a hair transplant. And he did. So shout out to Joe Pyfer. He's got the cleanest hairline in the UFC now, even if it's fake. And of course, like I said, he's bounced back since then with 2 wins. So shout out to Pyfer. He's in the win column again, but we cannot deny that him losing to Jack Hermanson when he was as hyped up as a prospect as he was, more punching power than Francis Ngannou pound for pound apparently, and came from the rags to riches story, was homeless at one point, to come into the UFC and doing what he did. It is impressive, but let's be real. Him losing to Jack Hermanson was 100% a fraud check. He was expected to go out there and KO Hermanson, who has pillow hands. Last but not least, most recently, at the most recent UFC event, UFC Abu Dhabi, Carlos Leal got fraud checked by Muslim Salikov. Old man Salikov, 41 years old, expected to be a lamb being led to slaughter going into the fight against Carlos Leal. Yes, he was expected to destroy Salikov. Yes, he was fraud checked by Muslim Salikov, the Kung Fu Warrior, I think his name is. Carlos Leal was a near 5-1 favorite going into this fight. He was pretty much like undefeated in the UFC. We know he had the loss to Renat Fakhretdinov. That was an absolute robbery. He should have won 30-27. So on paper, the fans were looking at this guy as undefeated, as Anthony Smith would say. On paper, I'm the best fighter in the world. Carlos Leal was known as his juice head. I mean, look at the acne on his body in the picture. You can literally see how much juice this guy's blasting. He's known as a power puncher who treads forward, looking to take your head off. He was going to give Muslim Salikov no space, when we know that Muslim Salikov's game is based around the kicks, the strong kicks that he has, right? But turns out that Carlos Leal doesn't have a chin, because old man Salikov, 41 years old, still got it, knocks out Carlos Leal in 42 seconds. A brutal loss. And listen, did I ever think Carlos Leal was going to be champion? No. But as me and a lot of other YouTubers, as in Lucas Tracy said, this guy would have to slip on a banana peel and go into the octagon blindfolded to lose to Muslim Salikov. And he did just that. Muslim Salikov brought all the banana pills. I'm kidding. Muslim Salikov knocked this guy's head into orbit and fraud checked him. How do you get fraud checked by a 41-year-old, bro? What are you doing, Leal? Bro must have not been blasting gear. He must have not been hanging around John Jones enough. Because if you're getting fraud checked by old man Salikov, who's on a 3-fight win streak, by the way, very impressive. Shout out to Muslim Salikov, the Kung Fu Warrior. Yeah, man, Carlos Leal, I don't know if I'm picking him now, because now we don't know if this guy's chinny or not. Who's to say now he doesn't get chinned by everybody he fights in the UFC that has decent power? So yes, this is the most recent fraud checking, and it was a brutal one, because Carlos Leal, I think in the eyes of the fans and the eyes of like the predictors of YouTube, the odds said -480, but in my mind, this guy should have been like a -1,000 favorite with how people were talking about how easy he was going to beat Salikov. And no, man, he got knocked out in 42 seconds. So yes, these are the most recent, or the biggest fraud checks in recent memory in the UFC, guys. Let me know in the comments if I forgot any, or any of you guys want to add. And let me know what you guys think of these guys getting fraud checked. Which of these guys you think are going to bounce back, and which of them you think are absolutely cooked going into the future? Let me know in the comments. If you guys enjoyed the video, of course, drop a like for me. I always appreciate it. I'm out, guys. Peace.